They are to bring the new women to their senses, to love their husbands and love their children, to be clear-headed, holy, the mistress of the house, supportive of their husbands, so that the word of God won't be blasphemed. And so, basically, so you're showing that women can be deacons, and deacons' sort of roles are organising things and organising, so the feeding of widows, so all those type of things. The only place where women are instructed, where women don't, how they don't operate in the church is to teaching over man. So it's like a overseer job. So it's like the CEO, I guess, of the church, but it's not. That's not a good thing. But the person who is responsible for the whole assembly, and then the elders. And the elders there's supposed to be several of them, and they are known because the people recognise them as elders, not that they kind of get elected in like some churches. I mean, they're all different. But generally, back in the early church, they were acknowledged as being elder material, and they were all male. And they are just like the watchdogs, or the ones that deal with the doctrinal issues and the teaching issues. And when it says, an elder must be appointed in every town, so it's basically saying men lift up holy hands, and they're the ones that. So it was sort of saying that they teach, and they're the ones that are accountable for sound doctrine. And some people have argued that, that was back in that day, and now, women can do that. Well, the thing is, it seems to be like women, there's other scriptures that talk about women being able to prophesy, they can be deacons, they can bring a word, as long as they're under the covering, like a teaching, because it says some bring a hymn, a word, a teaching, a prophecy, that talks about, to build up the saints. So, and to do the work of the ministry. So when you think saints, to do the work of the ministry, all saints, that includes women, do ministry. But the difference is when we come together in a great big community, or as a church that meet for that certain time, it's the elders that they're like they keep the wolves out. So in that way, it was like in the military, whereas men, they protected. And there's so many scriptures around men providing and protecting. So if they've got that role, it's a leadership role, they need women to be supportive. So, and then the other thing, it talks about women being supportive to their own husbands, not every man, but their own husbands. So that's in Ephesians 5:22. Marriage, it talks about marriage in the church. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. And then Colossians 3:18, wives, submit to your husbands as fitting to the Lord. And 1 Peter 3, wives, submissive to your own husbands, even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the contact of their wives. So when it's talking about submission and order, it's saying we're not intelligence-wise weaker than men, like women aren't. They could be more intelligent, but it's a ranking thing. Like you've got like a general in an army has a higher rank than a colonel. So in order for the army to work, he does this, and then the colonels do this, and the sergeants do this. So it's layers of authority. Now, so the whole thing works. But it's, you could have a general who's not near as intelligent as a colonel or a sergeant, but they do have a line of command, and they have to stick to that. So it's just so it runs smoothly. It's just, you have it in government authorities, like leaders have different roles and they have to do a certain thing. So like when I was a registered nurse, so I had a ranking over an enrolled. So I had authority in that, so I could direct enrolleds. Now, they had to follow my lead, and that's just because of my rank. I suppose in nursing, and you can see it in teaching too. You've got your deputy heads and your heads or principals. So it works in the world. But the difference in the world is that it talks about don't lord over like they do in the world, like people in the world, and they abuse the power for their own ends. So those men who are elders and overseers, if they lord over and use their power or their authority with their own hands, they are doubly judged. And it talks about that teachers are judged more harshly than those who are not. So with the responsibility, with the authority goes responsibility, and the Lord, is very serious about people abusing that. He talks about that and rebukes it. And when you look at a guardian is just a facilitator. So women can bring a hymn. It's not like they can't speak at all. When it's talking about being silent, it's talking about not causing a fuss, or if they have a problem or don't understand something, talk to their husbands at home, because they were interrupting the meetings. What was happening? They were going, I don't get this and I don't get that. So they were, because some of the women in Ephesus, they had, and in Corinth, they had leadership roles. So he was sort of saying, so it won't become chaotic. They are to learn from their husbands at home. Now, there's plenty of other scriptures, so where women prophesied and they brought things, but it was usually in submission to the elders in that church. So it's not saying that they don't get to have any role. It's what they don't get to do is teach. Now, but then it goes on to say women, deacons, it talked about that in Titus, women to train other women to love their husbands and their children. Well, then women can teach other women and children. So that's a given. So it's only in these two institutions, marriage and when they meet together publicly for those big meetings. But during the rest of the week, if you have, like, you talked about Priscilla and Aquila, so she was mentioned first. So she was leading a home church, and she was leading. And it talked about how Priscilla and Aquila, they taught Apollos. So if, a woman sitting down and with her husband and teaching, just on that one-on-one or just with a small group is permitted. It's only when they come together with the elders and when the deacons, and when there's a big assembly and you've got your overseers, and so in that regard, they oversee, because they can keep out the wolves and they can challenge doctrines that's not sound. Women learn, and we learn what's sound and what's not, and so we can then teach other women. And a lot of women's ministries can just be left as not important, and that's where all the heresy comes. I've studied that too and looked at it and see a lot of women who are teachers and teaching over men. Sometimes they don't run their teaching often they don't by elders or a group of elders. They just have this lone women's teaching ministry. But if they're teaching women and they're teaching children, but the thing is they have authority over men, which isn't what is instructed, and that's often how they become heretics or go off course. So it's basically saying that women are the weaker vessel. That's physically and sometimes spiritually, but not morally. This is where people get it wrong. They're not morally weaker and they're not intellectually weaker. It's just different roles, and their value is not to do with their roles, because at the end of the day, we all stand before Jesus, and if a woman has faithfully trained other women to love their husbands and their children, has faithfully taught sound doctrine to other women, and has faithfully taught, one-on-one with men or in small groups, has prophesied in meetings, but she has the right heart and she's leading people to the Lord, like she's evangelizing, like Jesus presented to the Marys when he first rose from the dead. He also talked to it when he was about to launch his public ministry. He talked to the Samaritan woman at the well, and she went and told everybody that she'd seen the Messiah. So the Lord entrusted women to be evangelists. And so they just, and then because the other argument too is that, well, look, like some say that Mary Magdalene was an apostle, but there's no mention of her as an apostle. And if Jesus had sort of said, okay, like the apostles can be women too, he probably would have had 6 women apostles. But he didn't seem to be doing that. He was still teaching in line with the natural order of God the Father. Then Jesus submitted to God the Father unto death. And then there's Jesus, and then men, and then women. So it's to do with function, purely function. And so everything's done decently and in good order, in the way of love and respect. But often when women try to usurp authority with men, there's contention. And I've seen that again and again. And I've even experienced it in my own life, where I have reacted to authoritarian leadership and come back stronger. But then you being feisty and contending, and it just causes dissensions and it causes disruption in the meetings, because there's something to be said about learning quietly and without making a fuss, and talking to your husbands later Otherwise, you end up disputing everything. But you can still listen and hear and pray and bring things too. And if it's a prophetic word, and it's even a correctional word, you just deliver it. Women can do that, but it's when they have that, when there's a two-headed monster trying to dominate, it doesn't end well. So that's all I really have to say about that. Talking about the two-headed monster, and then so when you look at it as far as men and women in marriage, it talks about you come together and you look at the division of labour. It's not strict set gender roles as such. It's just saying that men generally like to be the providers, and generally they are. In some instances they can't be, and women do go out to work, but she should also be able to look after the children, because she naturally is a nurturer and cares for the children. Sometimes you can swap those roles. It's not rigid, but it says in generalisations that women tend to like doing that and being able to work, but as long as both people are happy with the division of labour, the way it goes. And it's that happens in every marriage, and each couple looks at how they will do things, and sometimes a woman will be the one working if she's the only one that can get work. But then you will find a lot of men who do look after the children, do the domestic role, do feel less of a man and would rather be providing. In some instances that don't, but generally, when you look at generalisations, that's sort of how it works. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that. We could talk about how a husband and wife should be, but it's to do with respect, because it talks about women respecting their husbands and men loving their wives, like Jesus loved the church. So he laid his life down. So he's got a pretty tall order. She respects that because he's got the leadership role, and she lifts him up and she supports him, and she's in the supportive role. And it's taken me years to really come to terms with that, because I had a lot of feminist ideas around it's not fair. And because people have said that I am a natural leader, and I've been in leadership sort of roles, and I do think for myself and quite independent. I've struggled. I have actually really struggled in a marriage, being in that supportive role. But I do know when I have been far happier, and I realise that because we're one, I have everything he says he has and more. So I benefit from his leadership, and he can lead well. And I find that I gravitate and I enjoy doing the things that women traditionally like doing, like being in that supportive role as far as looking after the house and the garden. A lot of women would say that, the feminist movement hasn't worked in the sense that women say, I can do everything, and that's what I thought, I can do everything a man can do, and I could be in a leadership role, and I could do this, do that. And I can, like in my career, I went far and was in leadership roles, and so I have the capability. But in the domestic sense, if you're working full time, you're looking after the house, you're looking after the children, and you're trying to look after the garden as well, you end up you say I can do everything, but you end up doing everything. That's what happens, because generally, like I will say with my husband, he has a more of a leaning to the overseeing thing, and so when he was in the domestic role for a while, he would miss a lot of things, and then I complain about him not doing a good job. And then with the children, he was a good father, but some of the nurturing things I felt that he lacked. So if I'm going to criticise, as a woman going to criticise the way he does those things, I found that that's not good, and so I just end up doing them and enjoy it. But then if you're expected to work as well, trying to juggle the lot is really difficult. So I'm saying each couple works it out, but it tends to be that women tend to like doing more the domestic stuff. And if they get bored of that and looking after the children, that and you can work, well, you can as well, but you should have that choice. Because otherwise you feel as a woman in this world, in the 21st century, that if you're not doing it at all, then you're really not a woman. So if you stay at home, if you opt to stay at home and be the domestic wife and look after the children, then a lot of feminists would say, well, what are you doing? You're not adding to the house. You're just doing the boring stuff. It's not significant. So then you go out and you become corporate, and you go right up the ladder and you work really hard, and then you find that you come home and you're exhausted and you can't do any of the other stuff, and you want to do it, and then you feel guilty because you think, well, he could do it, but he often doesn't have that natural flair for it. So we can't get angry at our husbands if they don't. And, there are differences between men and women. I mean, we can't dispute it. And I know feminists have traditionally said, yeah, but that's gender roles. But there has been experiments with young boys and young girls and what they gravitate to naturally without any gender roles being forced upon them. And, you see it again and again. The girls do tend to go for the nurturing sort of role things. They will go for the dolls. They will do traditional things. So it's been an experiment and it hasn't worked in a lot of ways. But when the feminists are saying, women should be able to have the right to vote, they should be treated with dignity and respect, and if they do one job and a man does the same, like as a politician, they should get the same amount of money. That's all common sense, and I'm not disputing any of that. I think we are in society, there should be justice and there is equity in those things, but it's talking about authority in the marriage and the church. But anyway, I leave that there. So there will be another session that I will look at other tricky parts of the Bible as well that people have struggled with. But I'll leave it there for now. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in session 9.